Hafez al-Assad seized power in Syria in 1971. His rule was defined by an iron grip on power. Assad was a master strategist, consolidating control through a pervasive security apparatus. He ruthlessly suppressed dissent, crushing opposition with brute force. This approach instilled fear in the population. Assad understood the importance of alliances. He carefully cultivated relationships with regional and global powers. His alliance with the Soviet Union provided military and economic support. This backing bolstered his regime against external threats. Domestically, Assad maintained stability through a combination of repression and strategic concessions. He implemented social programs to appease certain segments of society. These programs provided basic services and economic opportunities. However, they were often used as tools of control, rewarding loyalty and punishing dissent. Assad's rule, while undeniably authoritarian, brought a degree of stability to Syria. He understood the complexities of Syrian society. He navigated its intricate web of ethnic and religious groups with a calculated hand. This stability, however, came at a high cost, silencing any whisper of opposition. Bashar al-Assad inherited the presidency upon his father's death in 2000. His ascension raised hopes for change. Bashar, a British-trained ophthalmologist, presented a stark contrast to his father. He spoke of reform and modernization, fueling optimism both domestically and internationally. The early years of Bashar's rule were marked by cautious steps toward liberalization. He relaxed some social restrictions. He allowed a degree of freedom of expression, albeit limited. These initial reforms offered a glimmer of hope for a more open and democratic Syria. However, this period of relative openness proved short-lived. The old guard within the Syrian regime, threatened by Bashar's reformist tendencies, exerted their influence. They pushed back against any significant changes to the existing power structure. The hopes for a Damascus Spring faded. Bashar, facing pressure from within his own government, gradually abandoned his reformist agenda. He reverted to the authoritarian tactics that had defined his father's rule. The Arab Spring uprisings of 2011 ignited long-simmering tensions in Syria. Inspired by the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, Syrians took to the streets. They demanded political freedom and an end to decades of Assad rule. The regime responded with brutal force. What began as peaceful protest quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war. The conflict drew in regional and international actors. It became a complex web of alliances and proxy wars. The Syrian people were caught in the crossfire. The Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, fought ruthlessly to maintain control. Opposition forces, fragmented and often at odds with each other, received varying degrees of support from Western powers and Gulf states. The conflict raged on, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives and displacing millions more. The Syrian civil war became a humanitarian catastrophe. Cities were reduced to rubble, hospitals were bombed, chemical weapons were used. The world watched in horror as a nation descended into chaos. The Assad regime, once considered unshakable, finally crumbled in the face of a determined rebel offensive. Key cities fell one by one. The regime's defenses, weakened by years of war, were no match for the coordinated assault. The fall of Damascus, the heart of Assad's power, sent shockwaves through Syria and the region. Rebels stormed government buildings, tearing down portraits of Bashar al-Assad. The symbolic toppling of Hafez Assad's statue in the suburb of Jaramana captured the magnitude of the moment. Syrians, both within the country and those who had fled across the borders, poured onto the streets in celebration. Years of pent-up frustration and anger at the Assad regime were unleashed. The toppling of the statues represented the end of an era, the shattering of a dynasty. The collapse of the Assad regime has left a void in Syria. The country is scarred by war, its people deeply divided. The road to peace and reconciliation will be long and arduous. However, the events of recent days mark a turning point in Syria's history. The shadow of the Assads has finally lifted,